Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming. Today, I would like to tell you about an amazing telescope you can build, how you can build your own telescope which is optimized for the moon and planets based on proven design principles. And some tips for observing the moon and planets, even if you're not interested in building your own telescope. So some people might wonder, why observe the moon and planets? Well, here's a big part of the reason for me. I live right downtown Toronto. This is the 5th biggest city in North America. So you can imagine the light pollution is pretty bad, and it's only getting worse. 8 years ago, I bagged 5 Messier galaxies from my urban rooftop. Exceptional night. This is with a 6-inch reflector, but that was just once. But it's hard to navigate the night sky very often, but I still love observing the moon just as much as I did when I was a kid during the Apollo program. And the planets, I can find them easily, even right downtown, where it's hard to even see the constellation stars on many nights. Now, don't get me wrong, I love to get out under a really dark sky, take a long drive, and do some deep sky observing. But sometimes the sky doesn't cooperate. And I find increasingly when you get there, you'll find there's a whole lot of people with their light campsites lit up with bright tiki lights and wandering around with their tablets illuminating the landscape in white light. So I still do most of my observing at home nowadays. And just a 3-minute elevator ride away, I can share the view with all sorts of people who often get their very first look through a telescope. It's a whole lot of fun. It puts the party back in Star Party. Now, some other people who have similar observing situation down around the Los Angeles area have been involved in kind of a friendly competition for decades. They've been competing to see who can build the best planetary telescope. Now, their benchmark was a 10-inch f/16 Zeiss apochromatic refractor. That is one mean machine. Might cost you about as much as a house in Los Angeles. But for a tiny fraction of that cost, someone built a 13.75-inch Newtonian that delivered superior views on most nights. And they came up with a list of criteria. This is by iteration over decades. This is what they found is what worked for a wonderful planetary telescope. If you follow this criteria, if you're building such a telescope or having it made for you, you'll have a fine, fine planetary telescope. Interestingly enough, on the other side of the continent, Bob Royce came up with very similar criteria independently. You can find them here on his website. For those of you who don't know, a Newtonian telescope is a very simple telescope that took a genius, Sir Isaac Newton, to invent it. It uses mirrors rather than lenses. Light comes down the tube, it's reflected off the primary mirror, a concave mirror, to the secondary mirror, where it is in turn reflected through the focuser to the eyepiece and the eye of the observer, and it has a lot of benefits. It also has some drawbacks, which these folks in Southern California, ALPO members, addressed and pretty much resolved. They found that provided that you have a first-class mirror, it has to be about f6 or longer. But f6 is enough if you've got a really good mirror. And if it's a really great mirror, there's no real benefit to getting a longer focal ratio. But amateurs like me may be wise to make such an instrument with a longer focal ratio, because I don't have the skills that some of the top opticians. I love making telescopes. This is the first one I built about 20 years ago, and it's a bit of a habit. Uh, but this telescope, built by Frank Dempsey, who's right over here, was a real eye-opener for me. He made his mirror and the telescope, and there's a reason why there's a long lineup for the eyepiece to have a look through this telescope. So a few years back, I joined the line, had a look, and there was Saturn in the eyepiece. Oh my, what a view. I'm talking the crepe ring in an 8-inch instrument. That was fantastic. I was so impressed that I built this telescope. I made my own mirror, my first mirror, and this was the result. It took me a long time to make that mirror, but you don't have to make a mirror to get a great telescope that's great for planets. If you go to any one of these fine opticians, you can get a mirror that will work just great. This particular telescope I built has these various features and parts. It pretty much follows Ed Grissom's so-called pinball machines criteria. I used a Kind Optics HC2A focuser. This is a low-profile focuser, which allowed me to use a small secondary mirror, just 1.31 inches, under 20% of the primary mirror size. You could use a moonlight if you can get a hold of one, or if you got deep pockets and want a delicious focuser, Starlight Instrument focuser is crazy overkill for a telescope such as this. You can go in the other direction. For under 10 bucks, you can put together a focuser from plumbing parts, and Stellafane.org can show you how. For somewhere in between, it's still very inexpensive. You can go to one of the Toronto libraries that has a 3D printer or a commercial 3D printer. You can pick up a design for that for free and give it to them. They can print you a 3D focuser for a very modest cost. I was also fascinated by this focuser, which was designed by Pierre Lemay. One of them is good even for telescopes of f3 or faster. This is the size of my secondary mirror, 1/30th wave, 1.31 inches. That is, some people say it's crazy overkill. You could just make your own using float glass, which is an option if you don't want to spend a lot of money. I'm curious about that. I'd like to see just how it works. If you test float glass, you might find it gives about 1/8 wave if you make a few of them and you keep the best one. Bob Royce was the design of the secondary mirror holder that I made. This is a commercial focuser, or rather mirror holder to the right previously displayed. The design calls for a curved spider so that you don't get these diffraction spikes around the planets or bright stars. It doesn't take a lot of curve to make those diffraction spikes invisible. Here's the spider that's designed by Bob Royce. You can go here if you want to make that one. So the focuser, secondary mirror, spider all fit up here in the upper optical assembly, which bolts to the cog box. That's the center of gravity box shown here under construction. You'll see that right inside it is a cardboard tube. Why cardboard? Why not carbon fiber or something like that? Well, those Alpo members in Southern California, they tested just about everything. Aluminum, steel, fiberglass, carbon fiber, and they found that nothing beat a plain old-fashioned John Dobson-style cardboard tube for thermal properties. The altitude bearings are made of 3/4-inch plywood. I drilled holes in them to lighten the load. They go here. And below that, bolted on again with wing nuts, is the lower optical assembly. It connects with a plate seen above at 3/4-inch plywood. And again, there's that tube. There are 3 holes in the sides, one in the middle here. They are the boundary layer fans. Switch on the fans while you're looking through the eyepiece, and the image just cleans up in a real hurry, just in seconds. Below that is a 4th fan that that is also part of the design. Fans are required in this design, and that not only cools the primary mirror very quickly, it also cools the spider and secondary mirror. My particular telescope uses a 6-point mirror cell seen from below here and from above. And all of this fits in the lower optical assembly. Next, we go on to the rocker under construction here. This is 3/4-inch plywood for the rocker and altitude bearings, those semicircles. I cut out to reduce weight with a jigsaw, and the rocker weighs just 13 pounds fully assembled. I rounded off the edges so it would feel comfortable in the hands. It uses standard Dobsonian bearings. The plastic I used was just cut from cutting boards, and you can also use felt bearings for heavier motions, which are also very smooth, and they are very suitable for observing in windy situations. Here it is under construction. I'm gluing on the altitude bearings. You see below the rocker, I've glued on reinforcements to make it much more rigid, also hand grips to easily lift the telescope. That goes here. And the entire telescope fully assembled weighs about 56 pounds or 25 kilograms. I can easily lift the whole thing and carry it fair distances, no trouble at all. The interior I've painted with Krylon Camouflage Ultra Flat Black paint. I recommend you take several light coats with this. I find it is black enough that you do not need flocking. Not only for planetary magnifications, but also for deep sky magnifications, even RFT, the very low magnifications. In fact, I've put in flocking paper behind, looking through an eyepiece at every magnification, put it in, take it out, put it in, take it out. I can see absolutely no difference. Wonderful stuff. The exterior, I painted Rust-Oleum black hammer finish. I find after it's cured, it's quite durable. It's also easy to repair and hides minor imperfections in your woodwork. It took me 4 years on and off to make the mirror. I used cerium oxide, red rouge, and black rouge to achieve the polish that I really wanted after grinding the mirror. And just not that long ago, it seems, I got it to the figuring stage when I was finally satisfied with the polish. I rushed through the figuring so I could attend my first Stellafane this summer. It's the great granddaddy of amateur telescope making conventions, and it was a blast. Yeah, my first Stellafane, I've wanted to go to one for about 20 years. Hey, there's Lance Clark. He provided the grits for making my first mirror. And this is Asif Khan. He came all the way from India with his award-winning second place air travel telescope. You'll see right at the top of this telescope, there is a plumbing parts focuser. Not only is it good enough, but it is very lightweight, something which is valuable in an air travel telescope. There are all kinds of cool, funky designs, old school pipe mount, and this one was actually cut with a laser cutter, plywood with a computer-controlled laser cutter. Binocular observing chair, very comfortable for big binoculars, and check out the legs on this equatorial mount. Hockey sticks, rescued from a hockey rink. Stellafane gives extra points if you find economical materials and tools and so on that simplify and reduce the cost of making your telescope. This one, cedar strip, much like a cedar strip canoe. This one looks really portable to me. And some very unusual and interesting designs, including refractors and compound telescopes. This one won 2 awards last year, both for optics and mechanical design. And hey, this handsome fellow showed up, and I was urged to enter my yet incomplete, no fans installed yet. The mirror wasn't even illuminized yet, but the registrar urged me to compete anyway. Why? Because they want to have a lot of telescopes on the field. Rough count, there were maybe 30 telescopes there. There are maybe 1,000 people in attendance. So it gives them just one more telescope to look at. While I didn't win any awards, Alan Ward of the RASC Sudbury was kind enough to illuminize my mirror. He did 18 mirrors that weekend, hardworking man. Thank you, Alan. I really love your handiwork. The next day, my mirror was double passed, auto-collimator tested, and it was pronounced to have a wicked turned down edge, a textbook turned down edge. Now, that's not a good thing, but Dave Kelly, who knows a thing or two about optics, he's said to have several of his optics in outer space. Well, he said, mask 3/8 of an inch off the edge, use it and enjoy it. It's smooth other than the edge. Fix it when you have the patience. Use it and enjoy it. Well, when I got back to Toronto, I took Iman for her first night out in the town at Bayview Village Park. This image generously provided by Constantine Polterek. Thank you, Constantine. When I got back home later that night, I remembered, oh, I didn't put the mask in. It still provided pretty good images, but at home, seeing had improved. Jupiter was near zenith, almost straight up, and at 197 power, I observed Jupiter, and oh my. I've never seen more detail than that in any scope I've observed Jupiter in, including an 18-inch obsession, as I recall. Now, how could that possibly be? Well, it was masked to just 7 inches or so, 180 millimeters. So how is this possible? Well, I think part of it is that seeing is around where I usually observe, usually the limiting factor. Apart from that, I think it's the design of this telescope. It's a big tube, oversized, some would say, and the fans were not yet installed, but it was polished with black rouge. Maybe that helped. The mirror was smooth, and the turned down edge was masked. So that's what I conclude. If you follow this design, you can have a very fine planetary telescope. I also concluded after this long journey that in spite of all the difficulties and struggles I had doing this mirror independently without a master at my side to guide me, that I love making mirrors. My first mirror won't be my last. So how can you build your own planetary Newtonian? Again, if you follow these criteria, in my experience, you really can't go wrong. And there are some books in the Toronto library system you can order. If there's any one book about making telescopes I can recommend, it's this one by Jean Texereau, How to Make a Telescope. Especially great if you are making a mirror. Very concise, very good instructions that I followed, and they really helped me out. There's a lot of great information online. If you follow these links, if you're interested in making your telescope for planetary observing specialized, it's different from making one for deep sky. Check out all of these links if you want to do it, because there's some really valuable information in each one of them. Bob Royce actually has not only plans, Yeah, plans for making the blueprints basically, but also construction notes on putting it together. Mel Bartels has some outstanding software online that you can operate, all free for the asking. Wonderful tools. Thank you, Mel. I mean, again, very helpful. If you're interested in observing the moon and planets, getting more out of the telescope, which maybe you already have, definitely check out ALPO. They specialize in observing solar system objects, including the moon and planets. Bob Royce also has some very good observing tips for the moon and planets. And for eyepieces, I favor orthoscopics, Plossls. Simple eyepieces I find work best. I also enjoy observing with colored filters. They've really fallen out of favor, but I think they're wonderful. Particularly a red filter when observing the moon, especially when it's near full. When you're observing far away from the lunar terminator, you can see all kinds of detail that you would definitely not be able to see otherwise. Other color filters are useful for teasing out different features on various planets. And for Mars and for Jupiter, but particularly for Mars, I find the Bader contrast booster is by far the best one filter you can use. Now, you gotta collimate your Newtonian to get the best views. You wouldn't use you wouldn't play a guitar without tuning it first. You shouldn't use a Newtonian without first collimating it. It's really not that hard once you learn how. And you don't need to spend a lot of money on collimation tools for a telescope at f6 or longer, such as a planetary telescope. All you need is a black plastic 35 millimeter film can. I kid you not, you can get it from free at a photo finishing center. You know, just for the asking. They might have a half a dozen of them under the counter. Gary Saronic can show you how you can just drill a hole in the bottom and how to use it. And beyond that, to get the best possible collimation and the best possible results out of the telescope you have, Gary shows you no tools collimation. That's star test collimation. It gives you the best collimation you can get and the best views from your telescope. Bob Royce has lots of great advice for observers, and so does Cloudy Nights. You've got to read these threads, particularly the bottom one if you're interested in building a telescope for observing the moon and planets, as well as just observing. So, should you build your own planetary optimized telescope? Well, if you love to build and if you love to observe the moon and planets, sure. I built a number of telescopes. I really enjoyed it. And I think you'll really enjoy the project. But warning, you might find it's habit forming. Once I built one, I wanted to build another, just like making mirrors. But you don't need to make your own telescope to really enjoy observing the moon and planets. If you just get out under the sky, follow the tips, and share the view. Because if you do, you're going to have a lot of fun. So thanks very much, everybody, for listening. Does anybody have any questions? Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Hi.
Whoa. Just a second.
Thank you. Two questions. I live downtown also, so I don't know if it's possible to join you when you have those observation nights. I see some people in those photos. Is that like private, or is there a certain address and time where we can contact you?
Well, sure, I could have you over. Usually they're kind of spur of the moment. But are you on Facebook, possibly?
Yeah, I am. I mean, not a group still of this association, but I can be, yeah.
Sure, I just talk to me after. I can, sure, we can have you over sometime and we can do some observing.
Okay, as long as it's not intruding or anything.
Oh,
like this.
no problem. Just, you know,
just based on the
as my
photos.
private guest. It's not public. It's just basically people who live in the building and they're guests. But sure,
Oh,
be my
okay.
guest.
Thank you. And the second question, just out of curiosity, I know we are very limited with time, but I mean, when I see what you do and when I hear you, just similar to the guy that had a presentation before, I think this is genius work. Like, can you just tell us in 1 minute or less or a few sentences, how did this start? Like, how can you build these things?
Ah.
I cannot even begin to fathom where would I start from. I'm not asking for I'm just kind of amazed at what people can do, and I just want to hear a little bit of your story, if that's possible.
Well,
Thank
what happened, how I got started building telescopes was I was not completely satisfied with the first telescope that I bought after I got back into astronomy after a long layoff when I was in my 40s. And I was just looking for a link here. But anyway, when they have the video up, you can go to Bob Royce's website. He shows you what I mentioned, that he's got plans and construction notes. I followed his plans pretty much, made a couple little tweaks, and that's how I built my first telescope. And beyond that, I bought the Dobsonian telescope. It's available from the Toronto Library System for free, so you can check that out. There's lots of books actually in the Toronto Library System about building telescopes. So that's something you can do. I'm no genius. I'm handy, but I'm really no genius. If you're handy, if you like to build things, you can do it. Start with something pretty basic, like the Stellafane telescope is very simple. If you buy the optics, you could probably put it together in a weekend if you're really handy. So baby steps in the beginning, and you can get into more advanced telescopes as you go along. But if you make one, it could be risky because the first thing is you might want to make another one. And
Why did you paint the outside black? Because I can just see in a dark sky sight, you go, where is my telescope crash?
that's a good question. The reason I painted black was for thermal emissivity. The black paint, when I painted it, was the paint that, actually a flat black in particular, it cools off fastest. And often when the planets are in the west, and seeing is sometimes very good, I want to be able to have that telescope well cooled. So the black throws off the heat faster than white paint. It's like if you look at a black car parked next to a white car on a clear night, the black paint's going to absorb the heat of the sun really fast in the daytime. It gets really hot. Whereas the white car, it'll reflect that heat of the sun. But at night, if you look at those same two cars sitting side by side, and the black car will dew up in a hurry. It throws off that heat so fast, and that it just reflects the heat into space. It cools off and it dews up. So it cools off fast, but you might get some dew in a hurry too. So dew heaters or dew control of some kind is beneficial as well for your finders, for your eyepieces and so on. One thing I found effective just recently was covering up with, those reflective windshield covers you might put in your car on a hot sunny day in the summer. Well, if you cut those up and make some things that can wrap around the end of your finder, extend it, put some black flocking paper on the inside, and cover up your eyepiece when it's not in use. This can keep them from getting dew, and it's remarkably effective without even using a dew heater. So, long story short, that's why I painted it black, so it would cool off fast.
All right. All right, so we've got some online questions, and then we'll go back to questions from the audience.
Thank you. So we have a bunch of questions and comments online, and I'll try to go through them best as I can one by one. Guy Yanis says, Stellafane in Vapik, what a great place. Guy Yanis then says, is polishing your own mirror still beats commercial alternatives out there? I mean, besides the wonderful journey of DIY?
It can. It is a wonderful journey of DIY. I just loved making a mirror. I was very surprised how much I enjoyed it. As far as the quality is concerned, you can make a good mirror. This was my first try. My mirror had a turned down edge, which is not a good thing. But by masking that edge, I ended up with a good mirror if we do away with that bad edge of the mirror. So it worked for me. I've got so little experience with this, it's difficult for me to answer, but I have looked through many telescopes, including large telescopes and medium-sized ones, say 14.5-inch f4.2. So that's a fast mirror, and it's a fairly large one, made by an amateur, and it was the equal, in my opinion, of a Zambuto mirror, which is Carl Zambuto. He makes some of the best mirrors around. As I recall, it was just a magnificent view. So amateurs can make fantastic mirrors. It's easier if it's a longer focal ratio. So if you're making a planetary scope, if you make it f6, f8, f10, you can, even on your first try, I think, especially f8, f10, I think you can probably make a very good mirror. But if you're going to go down this route, if you can, learn from a master. Don't do what I did. Don't try to learn it over the internet. Don't try to learn from books. Try to get somebody who's at least an experienced mirror maker, ideally a master who can guide you and show you those strokes and help you fix problems and so on.
Tarek Al-Hamrani, who is actually from the UAE and joining us from there, says, I'm using my 7-inch Mac and 8-inch Newt. Both are nice. Nice view, really, and images, but larger will be better for imaging for me, because we have nice, excellent seeing, and sometimes above average. Guy Yanis then says, orthos are way better for observing planets, no question about it. Tariq then says, I have the first 2 beta filters, and people told me go for pluses for planetary view. To which Guy Yanis then says, beta filters are great. It is just that those design ripples stand in the way. Tariq then says, I will love to build if I can build. Louis R. says, great presentation, thanks.
Thank you.
And Guy ends our question to see for this talk with, this was very, very motivational. I'm not sure if I am hand-skilled or genius. I may get, sorry.
I'm no
may
genius
get
either,
my-
by the way. I'm no genius. I'm handy, but I'm not a cabinet maker. I'm not a machinist or anything like that. I'm just handy and pretty determined and stubborn. But if that's about where you are, yes, you can still make a telescope, especially if you take a class or something like that. It's another option if it's available around you.
Thank you. That's questions and comments from online.
Great.